Hi everybody, Mark here from PowerUP and welcome to another Friday special. What we're going to do today is we're going to go out and pick a question from the community and I'm going to show you how I would solve that problem live on a video. Well, I'm not going to build it live today, I've already pre-built this and I'm going to walk you through my solution to the problem. I find it's a little bit better than giving you just text answers and some screenshots in a forum, so let's see how we go on. So the first thing we need to do is we need to go and find our question. So I'm going to go into the Microsoft Flow community. If you are using Microsoft Flow or Power Apps and you don't really know about this community, I do recommend you get in. We've got about 25,000 users in this so far and there's a constant flow of questions and answers, so it's definitely worth looking at. So I'm going to pick this question today from Kicking Apps. First of all, I think it's an awesome name, so definitely got my vote that way. And what we're going to do is we're going to build your solution here. So you currently have an app that saves photos to Azure. I'm going to assume that means Azure storage containers. And then in Azure, you currently have a function that creates a small and medium thumbnail when a new item's added. And then what you want to do is have a flow that updates the SharePoint list with a JPEG from the thumbnail container. So basically, I think I know why you want to do this. I built something similar for a construction company in the past. And what it is, SharePoint storage can be quite expensive compared to Azure storage. And if you're a construction company going around doing lots of site visits, you can end up with hundreds of thousands or hundreds of thousands of images each year, and that costs a lot of money. It can be multiple gigabytes, hundreds of gigabytes, terabytes of data. You don't really want to get rid of those full quality images, but you don't want to use up all your SharePoint storage and have to buy more storage. So the intention here is we're going to save the high-res images in Azure storage, and we're going to save a thumbnail in a SharePoint picture library. So we get all the benefits of SharePoint, we get the image, we get all the metadata, but we're only going to save an image that's 1024 pixels wide, so we're not going to use much space. And then what we can do, just have a link into the full-size image in Azure. So we get the best of both worlds, and we save some money in the process. And I think that's what you're trying to achieve here, so that's what we're going to build. So there's a couple of things I've done to start with just to set up. The first one is I've gone into Azure and I've just replicated your situation a bit. So I've created a resource group called PowerUp, just so I can group my items together. And in here I've created a storage account. In my storage account, I've created two containers, one called Photos and one called Thumbs. In the Photos container, I've pre-created 6 photos in there. These are my large 1-2 meg images. You know, these could be much bigger as well, so I've saved them in here. And I've also got a directory, a folder for thumbnails. At the moment, that's empty because we haven't populated them yet. The next thing that we're going to want is we're going to want our flow. And this is the flow that we are going to be using. Okay, so like I said before, we've already built the flow, and I'm going to walk you through it step by step, and where we need to create connections to different services, I'm going to try and show you how I do them by recreating them. But it just makes it a bit easier for me to go through without you watching me figure this out for the first time. So if we go into the flow, let me just make this a little bit bigger, so it's easier for you to see. There we go, that should be a bit better. So we're going to the flow. The first thing we're going to do is I'm actually, just for demo purposes, I'm going to manually trigger this flow. Okay, so you might want to do this by a trigger on the Azure storage container, so when a new item's created, go off and create the thumbnail. Now this is the way I did it first, but I had a couple of issues with this. So when I had a trigger from the storage container, it just told me that an item has been created in there. It didn't actually give me the item that was created like we might expect from a SharePoint connector. So the first operation I needed to do was go and get files. And then there is a limit to how many files you can get. I'm not sure what order they come out, but I couldn't really apply a filter on either to say just get me the latest file or get me the file that caused the trigger. It was a bit frustrating, and for some reason when I got all files it didn't include the last file. It was always one less than the file there, so I think there's some problems there at the moment with the Azure storage connectors, and that's why at the moment I've gone and done it with a manual trigger. So that's just something to be aware of. Now the Azure storage triggers are in preview at the moment, so that might be why. They're probably just working on it, and I really hope that gets fixed before it goes live. So for now, just for demo, I'm going to do a manual trigger. So we'll click it and it'll just go through and process all of the images in that folder. Okay. So if we kind of jump back in, ignore these two variables for now, I'll come on to them later. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go and get a list of blobs for my Azure storage container. Okay, now I've already got this set up, but I'll show you how we connect a new one. So if I add a new connection, let's say I want to connect this to an Azure blob service. So the first thing I'm going to do is give it a connection name. This can be anything you want, it's just for you to recognize it yourself. So PowerUP Photo Browser, and Azure storage account name. So if I go to my Azure storage account, the account name is PowerUp Photos. That's what I called my Azure storage account when I created it. So that's what I put in here. The next thing we need is this Azure storage account access key. Try and say that 10 times fast. That's really easy to get. When we create it, we just go into this area called access keys, and this shows me the access keys. Okay, I have 2 access keys that I could use, and also gives me a full connection string. I'm just going to copy that first one. Don't try and copy it. I will have deleted it by the time this goes live, and I would just type that into here, and that's basically my password. So what that means is I'm actually authenticating against the Azure storage container with similar to a client ID and a client secret. I'm not using my own credentials in this case like we do with SharePoint. That's really useful. If I leave the business, then that carries on working. It's a nice way of doing it. So I could just click create, that will create my connection, and then that will actually just show me all of the items that I have in that current storage container. In this case, the 2 folders, photos and thumbnails. So the first action I have here is I actually want to go and get a list of all the items in the photos. Okay, so that's going to list my 6 current photos that I have in here. Okay, that's these fellas here. So that gets in my list. And then what I want to do is apply to each. So I'm going to go and process each item I find in Azure. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get the full size image. I'm going to get the blob content. Okay, so I'm going to get the actual image file from Azure Storage, and I'm just going to pass in the path here. So this is the path that I get from the apply to each. Okay, so if I click in here, I can see we have my apply to each current item, and I can pull the path out of that. Infer content type, yeah, sure, why not? So that's going to get me the actual image body. Okay. What I'm going to do then is I'm going to generate the thumbnail path, so where I want to save the thumbnail to. So if I go back to my Azure container, I created a folder called thumbs. So my path is going to be /thumbs/name. So where I get my blob item on the apply to each, I'm going to take the file name and add that to the end of thumbs, and that's going to generate my file path. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and get the thumbnail. Now, why would I try and get the thumbnail? I know it doesn't exist. Well, because if I run this over and over and over, I may have created the thumbnail on a previous go, and if that's the case, I don't want to go and edit it. I just want to skip over it. So I'm going to go and try and get the file content of the thumbnail. Now, what this is going to do is this is actually going to throw an error. So Flow is going to fail, and it's going to give me a 404 error here, which basically means that file not found. So 404 is a very techie way of saying, I can't find the file, it doesn't exist. So normally what Flow would do, Flow would actually just quit at that point and say, there's a failure, I can't carry on, I don't know what to do. So what I could do is just check that and see if it exists. Now, the better way of doing it, in my view, is we have this configure run after option. So what I can do, if I configure run after on my get blob content, what I can see here is I'm going to run this action if thumbnail path succeeds. So if that's successful, carry on. But I have these other options. Has failed, is skipped, or has timed out. Now, I want this to fail because I want the thumbnail to not be available. So what I could do is configure the run after on here and say, if the previous step failed, then run the rest of it. So I've got a bit of if-then conditions here. If it fails, then carry on, etc. And a bit of error handling in here. Now, if I wanted to update it or check it, I could actually install a parallel branch here and have another set of functions that say, run this side if it's successful. So I could have different scenarios based on what's happening. But in this case, I just want to say, if it doesn't exist, then we want to go and carry on. Now, the next thing I'm going to do, so I apologize, you won't see in my browser then. So what I was saying is, I can add a parallel branch here, and then I could have my actions saying, if successful, go and run this set of commands. If it fails, go and run that set of commands. That's what I said there. Okay, so apologize. So if the get blob content fails, what I want to do is I want to generate a thumbnail. Now I'm going to use the Vision API in Azure to generate a thumbnail. Now, Kicking Apps says they already have a function that does this. It's just allowing me to simulate their situation a bit. But for other people, you might be interested to know how to do this. So what we can do is in Windows Azure, I'm going to go into my PowerUp resource group, and I'm going to add a new service in here. I'm going to type Vision with an N. That's going to give me some options. So I'm going to go for the computer vision version. I'm going to create a new item here. Give it a name. I'm going to call this PowerUp Vision API. Choose what subscription I want to put it in, where I want it to be located. Okay, we're coming to Brexit, so I'm going to keep all my data repatriated, and then I can choose my available pricing. It's not going to let me choose a free option here because I've already got a free option in this subscription, but I would choose the free option normally, and I can choose what resource group I want to put that in. So that's how I would go and create a new Vision service, and when that's created, what that would give me is something like this. And it gives me a lot of help information. So we'll come up against this in a moment. So if I was going to add a new computer vision API, this is what you would see. So it's asking me for a connection name and an account key and a site URL. Connection name, this is my friendly name for the connection, so I can reuse it. So I can call the PowerUp Vision connector, anything I want. Account key, grab your keys. Keys. Okay, so here's my key 1. Copy that and paste that in there. Site URL, root site URL, if not specified, blah, blah. So I need some kind of site URL. Where might I find that? Let's go back to the quick start and, or make an API call to this endpoint, and here's the URL. So that's the URL that I'm going to take, and I can add that in there. So what's going to happen is now Flow knows what endpoint, what URL it's going to send my image to, and it's going to be able to authenticate to that endpoint with my account key. So Microsoft knows to bill me and not you. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do something with that. So that's how I would create my connection. And so what we're going to do is we're going to give a thumbnail width. So I want my thumbnail to be 1024 by 768. You could do some more complex math in your flow to actually process this differently. You could say, I want to make, if it's wide or tall, I want to make the longest edge 1024, or I might have custom requirements, or I might want to might want to make it a square, and I could do some smart cropping if I want to make it a square, things like that. So we have all these options. But for now, what I'm going to do is I want my images to be 1024 by 768. It's a good small size, but big enough to be useful. And I'm going to send in some image content, and the content I'm going to send into it is I'm going to send in the file content from my get blob content action, so the one I had up here. Okay, so this is going to get my actual, sorry, I apologize, that's the wrong one. What I'm going to do is, I'm going to get the file content of my full-sized image. So up here, I got my full-sized image, and I'm going to get the file content from there, and I'm going to send it to the generate thumbnail action of the Vision API. Okay, so that's going to go off. It's going to call something over in Azure. That's going to do some processing on it, and then it's going to send me a new image back to Flow, which I can do something with later on. Okay, so after I've generated my thumbnail, what I want to do is I want to upload that thumbnail to Azure. Okay, so I'm going to use the Azure storage actions again. So if I add an action, show you what it looks like. I'm just going to type storage, Azure blob storage, and create blob. So I've got all these options. I can create a blob block blob, I can copy a blob, I can create a SAS URI, I can delete blobs, I can get blob content, I can set blob tier by path. I can do tons of stuff here that is far more technical than maybe we need to worry about. But all I want to do first, I want to create a blob. I want to create my thumbnail blob, okay? All blob means, it just means binary large object. So that's what it means. It just means it's a binary file, it's a computer file, and it's a large object. So I'm just going to store a chunk of some data. It just happens to be an image in this case. So folder path, I want to store this in my thumbs folder. The name, I'm just going to set the name to be the same as the original file name. It's in a different folder, so I don't need to put a -tm on it or anything. And with blob content, I'm just going to put in the content that I got back from my Vision API from the generate thumbnail, and that's just going to give me my thumbnail back. So that's going to save that into Azure storage. So that's just going to save it into this folder in here. So far, so good. I'll go into my thumbs. There we go, we can prove it's empty at the moment. Okay, so when I create the blob, then what I want to do now is I want to get the blob content of the thumbnail now, okay? I already kind of have it from the Vision API, but I'm just going to go and get it again from Azure Storage to make sure I'm loading that same image into SharePoint. Okay, so I'm just going to pass in the path of the objects I've just created, and that's going to get me my image back. Now, technically, just for the solution to work, we don't actually need to store the thumbnail in Azure because we're going to store it in SharePoint. So what we could actually do is have our check at the top. Instead of saying get blob content here in Azure for the thumbnail, we could actually do that check in SharePoint. We could go to SharePoint and say, does my image exist in SharePoint with this file name? Yes or no. So we could have done it there, but I'm just going to keep the thumbnails in Azure as well, just so we've got a copy of them. Okay, so I've uploaded my thumbnail to Azure, and the next thing I want to do is I want to upload my thumbnail to SharePoint. Very simple. I'm just going to use the SharePoint connector in Flow, and I'm going to pass in my site address. Okay, so if we go to my site, we can look at my intranet, we can go to site contents, and I've already created my picture library. My picture library is called PowerUP, and this is a straight out of the box picture library. The only thing I've changed on it is I have added a column on it called full image URL. So I've got a new column on the list called full image URL. I'm a good SharePoint citizen, so I'm going to create my columns without spaces, and then I'm going to go back and rename the friendly display name with spaces in. It makes your life a lot easier. And if you start working with SharePoint and Flow, you're going to hate spaces. Okay, so we're going to create it without spaces first. So we've created a new hyperlink column, and this is just going to store the link for the full-size image. So we've currently got that in our intranet. So we're going to create a file in SharePoint. We're going to pass in our SharePoint site URL. We're going to give it a folder path. So this is the folder to the picture library, PowerUp. File name, so just going to pass in the name. We're going to use the same name that we had in Azure. Again, you might need to do some name check and make sure there's no conflicts, things like that. You can pad the flow out to do all your error handling. And the file content we're going to pass in, we're just going to pass in fact, I'm actually just passing the thumbnail from the Vision API. So technically, I don't really need this other step in here. Okay, so that's going to create my file. Now, one of the annoying things with create file in the SharePoint connector is that I can't actually set my file metadata at the same time. So I have to create the file, and then I need to go and run another operation on it to actually set the metadata. The metadata I want to set is the title of the image, and I also want to set the URL for the full file. So once that upload has happened, I'm going to run an update file properties command from the SharePoint collection of actions, and I'm going to set the URL. Now you might notice something a bit strange here. My library name is a GUID. My library name is not PowerUp, which is the name of my image library. That's because when I go into a update file properties, it only shows me the option for document libraries. Now, a picture library is actually a document library. It just has some different properties on it, but for some reason Microsoft Flow and the SharePoint connector doesn't show me my picture libraries. Very annoying. However, it doesn't mean you can't use it. all it means you do is, so I go back to my browser again. All it means is, what we need to do is we need to go to our library, and if we go on to library settings, then we can see up here we've got the ID. Now you want to ignore the %7b. %7b basically just means a curly brace, and we want to copy this part of the ID here. That's my library name. Okay. If I go back to my flow, I can put my library name in here, and Flow will then understand my library in the same way as before. So enter custom value, paste it in, and then Flow can find it. So ID is a required field, so I have to put the ID in. I want to set the title to be the name we had, and I want to put the full image URL in. So I'm just going to pass in the base URL for my my photo library in Azure. That's my PowerUP photos. So we can get the URL in here. If I go to, I believe it's in properties. So if we go to properties, then this shows us the primary blob service endpoint. So that's where my images are stored, powerupphotos.blob.core.windows.net. Okay, so we put that in, and then we put in the path. Okay, so it knows where to find the full image. Now bear in mind, the path here, be careful, first time I did it, I put the path into the thumbnail. I don't want the path to the thumbnail, I want the path to the actual full size image. So make sure you get the right value in there, and that's all we need to pass in. So if we save our flow, okay, that's now saved. So I think we're ready to go. So we've got all the steps in here that we want to process. So just as a quick recap, first thing we're going to do is we're going to manually trigger it. Then we're going to get a list of the blobs in our photos folder. Then what we're going to do for each blob we find, we're going to get the full size image. We're going to generate the path for the thumbnail. So we're going to take thumbs/file name. Okay. And then we're going to try and get the thumbnail image from Azure storage. We want this to fail because then we know we found a new item. If that fails, so we do a configure run after. If that fails, then what we're going to do is call the Vision API, and we're going to generate a thumbnail, in this case of size 1024 by 768. And then we're going to upload that thumbnail to our Azure storage container, and we're going to put that in the thumbs folder. And then we're going to upload it to SharePoint, and then we're going to update the properties of the SharePoint file to include the link to the full image URL. And that should basically satisfy the requirements from the reader, from the original poster. So what I'm going to do is test flow. We'll run this. Before I run it, let's just prove one more time that we're doing this for real. So go to PowerUp Photos, go into blobs, and in my photos you can see I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 photos in here. Go to my thumbnails. I don't have any thumbnails in here currently. Go to my SharePoint picture library. I don't currently have any images in here. So let's go and run flow. Put my face on the video so that you can see my excitement. So if we run flow, started successfully. Now we sit and wait. Have a drink of tea. This looks good. I've got my list of blobs. I can see it's found 6 items and it's going through. I haven't got any failed yet. I'm going to check my thumbs folder. Ooh, got 2 thumbnails. So the first part has worked for those 2 images. Go to SharePoint, I've got 2 images. Fantastic. So go to my 2 images, go and click into one of them, and I can see here that I have a full image URL. Click my full image URL and I can see my image. Third one has worked. See details, full image URL. So it looks like it's working. And just to prove, oh, that has sent me off to thumbs. That sent me off to the wrong URL. So let's go and fix this up a little bit. Always good to check. So let's go in here, file properties. So I've got the wrong path in here. So create, see, yeah, so create blob path. Actually, this should be my it should be get blob content full size image. Oh no, hang on. This is my apply to each. In my list blobs. It's my list blobs piece that I need to do. So it is the path in here. That's the one that I want. So if we save that. This is the great thing about doing this video is you see some of the errors that we put in. So even though I've pre-created this, because I've changed a couple of things as we've gone through, you can see where some of these errors happen. So I'm just going to delete these thumbnails again so we can start again. We'll go back into SharePoint, we'll delete my images, just to prove it all works. Click delete. There we go. Okay, so all my images have gone. And let's try running that again. So save, test. Again, we can just wait for that to run through. So if we're going to have a look, we should be able to see the thumbnails refreshing in here. Oh, I haven't actually started it. That helps. So we're running, found 6 items again. There's one. Go to our picture library, there it is, see details, scroll down, full image URL, and we can link people off to the full size image over in Azure. Just to prove, yeah, that is 3088 pixels by 2320. And the SharePoint version, if I view the original image and inspect this, zoom in to full size, and we can see this is 1024 by 768. So we can see that everything has actually worked there, and we're a lot happier storing all of that content in SharePoint. So that looks like it's running through nicely. How are we getting on? We've got 4 out of 6 done. I do find the apply to each very slow. This drives me crazy how slow this is. Now, if you're doing one hit at a time, it doesn't really matter. Or if you're doing an overnight process, it really doesn't matter. But when it comes to editing it, that can be really frustrating. I've got a real issue with the apply to each. It's just ridiculously slow, and I don't know why. That's one of the reasons I don't like to run apply to each over all items. I prefer to trigger or filter based on the items that I actually just want to process. So for now, let's just see how we are getting on. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items. Go into SharePoint, close that, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items. So there we have it. We have our Azure images. We've got our thumbnails in SharePoint, and that basically solves the original poster's original request. So I hope that's useful. Now I have one other little thing to show. Since we're using the Vision API, I thought we may as well go and do something a little bit extra. And you may notice on some of these videos, if I bring up the details, then what I've actually got is a description. A man holding a baby. Newborn, eating, baby holding indoor walled person. I have a description here. Wait, but where did this description come from, I hear you ask? I don't remember putting any descriptions into anything. So, a young boy holding a teddy bear. Okay, maybe that's not quite right. I'm not that young, and my daughter is definitely, well, she's a bit like a teddy bear. What we got on this one? Details. A group of people posing for the camera. Yeah, that seems pretty accurate to me. What we got here? I'm guessing something to do with bananas. A person wearing a costume. Yeah, okay. And what have we got here? So, yeah, apparently a woman holding a toothbrush. So apparently my wife is singing into a toothbrush. Fantastic. And lastly, a man holding an orange. Okay, so point is we may not want to rely too much on these descriptions that we get, but they could be useful in situations where we get the right content back. So very quickly, how do I do that? That will run successfully. If I go in, so just using that same computer vision API, I just called an item called Analyze Image. There's a couple of options in there: Analyze Image, Describe Image, does the same thing. So all I'm going to do is pass to that the image URL. Now, when I've created my storage account, I've made it accessible so that all these blobs are anonymously accessible over the internet. You're probably not going to want to do that. You're probably going to want to tie this down with a SAS key, and then you could just put the SAS key on the end of the URL here so that the cognitive APIs can use it. That's a conversation for another day, but just be aware of that. Go and bingle it if you need to find out more. So all I do is I just pass the image URL to the cognitive services, and then I go and update my SharePoint properties with the details. Now, the reason I've got these extra bits, I've got these arrays and these apply to each, is the description comes back as an array of descriptions, and the tags come back as an array of tags. So all I do here, I just use a string variable, and I go through and I just add the tag to the string variable each time. So I just build up a string of all of the tags and all the variables, and then I just run another update file properties and pass in the string variable for the description and tags. Okay, just a small extra piece, but you know, while I'm doing my images in SharePoint, I may as well put my descriptions on there. It's kind of cute, really. So I'll just leave you there with a rather embarrassing photo of me at my New Year's Eve photo booth. So, kicking apps, I hope that's useful. I hope that answers your question. I think we've seen some pretty good and interesting things there. Bear in mind the configure run after. That's a really powerful tool that you can use to manage the flow of your apps as well. If you're struggling with if conditions, if something exists or doesn't exist, that's a really useful way of going and doing it. So I hope that answers your question. I've been Mark State, and this is PowerUP Friday Special, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you very much.